back, everybody, to the Fortune Roots podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Couture, and this week's guest is Chad Ryker. Chad Ryker is the host of Backcountry Rookies, and on this episode, you'll get to learn more about Chad and how he kind of started his podcast of learning what it means to go into the backcountry as a rookie, and for him figuring that kind of stuff out. We go over his history of what got him into hunting in the first place. He talks about some of his time that he served in the Army, and really just deep dive into who he is and what got him into this industry. And it was very insightful. He had a lot to share with us, and especially, me being a new hunter and new to this whole thing, he had a lot of good things to say and gear recommendation. And even on one of his podcasts, I encourage you guys to go check out his podcast, his latest one that I think last week put out, depending on when you're watching this. At the time of me uploading this, it was last week. He made a gear review video, and that was actually inspired by talking with me, and I found that super helpful. Just great guy. Awesome time to sit down and talk with him, and glad that he gave me his time, because anybody that comes on, I value their time because I know it's important to them and they're super busy. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy this episode with Chad Ryker. Thanks for tuning back in, everybody, to the Forging Roots podcast. This week I have with me Chad Ryker from Backcountry Rookies. Chad, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to people who might not know who you are?
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. This is super cool. I will get to my introduction, but I want to say that since you started this podcast, I think I listened to episode number 13 or something like that. And I'm really impressed, man. I really like your show up to this point, and I hope you continue with it. So
appreciate it.
Congratulations and best of luck in the future here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. And my name is Chad Ryker, and I am also a podcaster. My podcast is mostly focused around Western big game hunting, and it's called Backcountry Rookies. And the whole idea behind Backcountry Rookies was about 5 years ago, I guess. I didn't know what a podcast was, and I really didn't know anything about Western hunting. Like we talked before the show, I grew up in Indiana, so whitetail. I kind of knew a little bit about hunting whitetails and squirrels and rabbits and coyotes and, just that Midwestern type of game and Midwestern type of hunting where you sit in a tree stand and that kind of stuff. And I always knew because there's TV shows, and there was movies that you could buy VHS tape. I'll date myself a little bit. Yeah, I watched VHS tapes when I was a kid.
I barely made the cut.
Anyway,
I barely made the cut.
Yeah,
I do know what they are.
At least you know what it is.
I know what they are.
At least you know what it is. So, just watching the big buck shows and that kind of stuff. But I would always see elk and antelope and just some of the cool Western game. But excuse me, I never knew that you could really get into Western hunting as easily as what you can. I always thought it was a guide service and it was $20,000 or back then, $10,000 or whatever, just super duper expensive. So I just really never thought twice about it, right? I never thought anything about it. And then I joined the military and literally traveled the world all over the place, and came back, and I met my wife, and she's from West Texas. So I started with some opportunity of being able to hunt mule deer out in West Texas. And that's kind of where I got the bug for hunting again. I'd kind of lost it during after high school, when chasing girls and drinking beer and whatever, you kind of go down a different road. So I'd kind of lost the hunting bug, and I gained it back when I met my wife and started hunting out in West Texas. But West Texas is a little bit different than any other Western hunting because it's very private land.
Yep.
And they're huge ranches, huge ranches, like 50,000 acres and 75,000 acre type of ranches. And it costs money to hunt and do that kind of stuff. I was fortunate because there was some family, my wife's family manages ranches, so I was able to hunt on those ranches.
Okay.
But anyway, I wanted a challenge, right? I was going through a lot of transition stuff with the military at the time. I started out my military career as a combat guy. ground pounder, full adrenaline during deployments. Like I go was my lifestyle, and got blown up and shot and wounded and just tore up, right? And it was time for me to give that up and find a new career field in the military that was a little slower paced. And I really missed the action, and I missed the I don't know what part of it I missed. The adventure, I guess, is the part that I missed. And so I kind of turned to Western hunting to fill that void. And that was about 5 years ago. And then that introduction to, like I said, I didn't even know what a podcast was. And I was down in Central America I was down there for several months on a deployment, and I had my own car when I was down there, and my partner that I was down there with was like, "Hey man, let's listen to this podcast," because every radio station was in Spanish, and
right.
We didn't speak Spanish very good enough, right. But so he was like, "Well, let's listen to this podcast," and it happened to be a Joe Rogan podcast, and he had Cameron Haynes on that show.
Okay. Yeah.
So I listened, and those guys are buddies now, and they do a lot together. And but this was several years ago. So they talked a lot about hunting, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. The Western hunting idea. And then we kind of shifted mission a little bit, and we were stuck in some hotels and doing stuff, and I had internet. So then I found YouTube, and at the time I did a lot of shooting, long range shooting type stuff. And I was into long range rifles and marksmanship. And I was watching YouTube videos on long range shooting, and somehow through the YouTube tunnels and wormholes, I landed on a Randy Newberg video. And it was one of those, if you're not familiar with Randy Newberg, he's an absolute inspiration for Western hunting and conservation and just really everything out there. And I landed on one of his videos, and it just so happened it was one of the ones where Randy was kind of doing a tutorial on how do you get into Western hunting, right? And how easy it is, and over the counter opportunities. And I just started absorbing all of that, and everything shifted from long range shooting to Western big game. And so then the progression was, well, shoot, I'm going to start a podcast, and I don't know anything about Western hunting. So I want to start a podcast and tell people up front, I don't know what I'm doing. And this is educational for me. So I want to bring on the best of the best and the most knowledgeable people in the industry. And I would bring them on and then just ask them questions, right? On how to get into it, how to be involved, all this stuff. So that was a very, very long introduction. I apologize for that.
No, you're good. That's what this is for.
Yeah. So that was it. Backcountry Rookies, and that's the whole idea behind it. Was I've been trying to teach myself how to hunt Western big game for the last 5 years, and still try to figure it out every time I step on a mountain. I try to figure something.
I'm gonna say from what I hear, it's you learn something new every time you go out there, no matter how experienced you are, and the mountain's gonna teach you something every time too.
Yeah, I'm just gonna tell you something new every time. So,
but yeah,
totally, man. And
going back, I know you said so you're from Indiana, and what was the first thing that you like? Was hunting big in your family, or like what actually got you into hunting? Was your dad, family member, or what? What was the thing that you started off on and kind of progressed towards through high school, like you said?
Yeah. So, my dad was a hunter, and he hunted a lot of raccoons. We did a lot of trapping. We did a lot of stuff for fur, because back then you could sell fur, right? And you could actually get decent money for it. So my dad was always coon hunting at night, and we had dogs, when I was growing up. So that was probably my introduction to hunting, although I didn't necessarily enjoy it because I was a little kid, and you had to go out sometimes. The dogs would take off, and you wouldn't see them till 2:00 in the morning, and I'm a little kid sleeping in the back of the truck or whatever. So my introduction was usually coon hunting. And then we did a lot of trapping. It's me and my brother and my dad. We did a lot of muskrat type trapping, and running trap lines when I was a kid. And that was cool too, because my dad would always let us keep the money that we made off of those hides. So it put, during trapping season, during the winter time. Yeah, we got a little bump, here and there, a couple bucks or whatever. But
Mhm.
and then my dad hunted whitetail too. Nothing crazy. He wasn't trophy hunter, looking for the biggest buck. Like if it was a doe, then cool. But we always had some kind of deer
Yep.
meat, and something. And then as I got a little bit older, I got mixed in with some friends, and those guys really, really like to coyote hunt. So we did a lot of coyote hunting and
Okay.
running coyotes and stuff. So that was the majority of it. Nothing, like I said, nothing crazy, just pretty much old Indiana kid growing up in a tree stand when I did hunt, or walking around
Right.
late at night shooting coons out of trees. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
lot
that's
different.
kind of where it all started.
Yeah, it's a lot different pace than what obviously I grew up in city in Detroit here. So it's like this, like even just little stuff like that. That I talked to a couple people, like my one buddy, same thing, grew up, started just shooting squirrels out of the trees and just little small
Yeah.
game stuff. And uh not really having that background, so it's always interesting for me to kind of see where, especially in different states, how people kind of come up. And I know listening to like Meat Eater, Steve Ranella talking about too in Michigan, how he used to go out and then sell the furs as well, and like because back then you could get decent money for them, and just how things like that changed over time. And
Yeah, I don't even know what a pelt would be worth nowadays. I don't think they're worth very much at all.
yeah,
I
I'm
have I have no idea.
not sure. So you said you did that and kind of got out of it. So you ended up serving in the army, correct?
Uh-huh.
Okay, what made you want, is that something that you knew you wanted to do from a young age, or is this something that just kind of happened, or what's the story behind it?
Yeah, so it just kind of happened. I was working a factory job. I had a really good job, and I was happy, I guess, but it wasn't what I always aspired to do. I didn't want to be
Hmm.
a factory guy. But September 11th happened, and literally September 12th, I walked into the recruiter station and joined the military on
Gotcha.
September 12th. And then I didn't like join that day, but the decision was made. And then there was
Hmm.
some job search, and some recruiting process and paperwork and all of that. And I left a few months later for the military. So quit my job and took off and went and tried something new. And I just had an awesome, man. I had such a cool military career that
Yeah.
there's no, like, it was the best decision that I ever made. And it was joining the military. I joined late. I was 25 when I joined.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, a lot of guys go right out of high school and they get that out of their system. And right out of high school, I went to college for a couple of years, kind of like I just listened to your
For
Friday, your
Forging
Forging
Friday.
Friday that you did, yeah, about college and stuff. And I went for a year, very much the same. I kind of felt pressured into it, like you have to get
Hmm.
a degree, kind of thing. And that isn't what I wanted to do. I was
Yeah.
I was running around having fun, and so I went to college for a year, and it just wasn't my thing. So I left and got a job, and then it was several years later, and I was thinking about the military already. I
Hmm.
had a good friend of mine that had done some military time, and he always talked about his that it was just awesome for him, and he grew up so much, during that few
Yep.
years, and just really, really good for him. And so that idea was kind of in the back of my head, and I was kind of thinking like, man, I could probably do the military, even though I'm a little older now. And that turned out to be a really good benefit for me, was being a little more
Hmm.
mature and a little older when I did join. But I joined. I had the test scores to do anything I wanted to. I could
No.
have done literally anything in the military. And Black Hawk Down, a movie named Black Hawk Down had
Yep.
just released, and it was very combat oriented, and
Yep.
it was all about a Ranger battalion and their interaction in Somalia. And I walked into the recruiter and I said, I don't care. I'm going. That's what I want right there. And
That's it.
they
Yep.
couldn't. Yeah, I was like, that's it. That's the fight I want to fight. And they couldn't get me into, like, there was going to be, for whatever reason, I don't even remember why, but there was going to be a delay to get into infantry and rangers and special operations and
Yep.
any of that stuff. But there was still some combat related jobs that were out there and were available for a quicker ship. and to get me out the door quicker and get me to basic training quicker.
Right.
And I ended up choosing to be a cavalry scout, which in all reality ultimately ended up being infantry for what it was. Like shortly after I joined, when I joined, I went straight to Germany. I chose to go to Europe, and that was part of my signing bonus, or part of my incentive was I got to go to Europe.
Okay.
And we went to Europe and we trained in the mountains of Germany, and did land navigation. We trained for that type of warfare, that old European style, World War II style warfare. And then very quickly things changed and everything switched to desert operations. And then everything got to be really centric around CENTCOM, the Central Command AOR. And so once everybody started going to Iraq, there was no more like real specific job. Everybody was kicking indoors and everybody was doing infantry style stuff. So, but yeah, that kind of banged me up pretty bad. I had a few deployments and very little time in the United States. The first 8 years of my career, I was gone from, I was not in the United States at all, unless I took vacation. I was either in Europe, overseas in CENTCOM. I went to Hawaii for a few years, had a couple deployments in and out of Hawaii. So very, very high pace operations, and finally I like I said earlier, I got banged up pretty bad and switched my job, and then I slowed my career down a little bit at that point. But yeah, man, the military was awesome, and it was such a cool road to travel.
So when you were in there and you said you did some land navigation, how much of that's transitioned into your Western hunting? Did you kind of feel like you had a little bit of a step up, or was it not long enough to really cement anything?
Well, I didn't need to step up. I was very proficient in land navigation, but we did it differently because this was before Go Hunt Maps, and it was before all of these digital cell phones, man. We had these old GPS things that were not very good. They would tell you the direction you were traveling, and they might put you on an azimuth, but they were just not good. So everything that we did was old, like paper maps with protractors and measuring distance, and then using your intersection and resection to find lost locations. And like it was real land navigation. It wasn't like, well, just turn on your phone and watch the little dot move around in the mountains. It was the real deal. Now I think probably the hardest thing for me to do was to not use paper maps anymore, right? Like, because that's the way that I learned, was so old school. And I think the first 2 years that I hunted out west, I had bought paper maps, and I had an old protractor and compass. I had like all of the stuff I needed, but and then I still had a mapping software on my phone, and I kept wanting to go to the paper map, and then I was like, no, we don't need that kind of stuff anymore. We have this new reality. But I will say that one good thing is that I know how to do that, whereas a lot of guys in today's world don't even know what a paper map looks like, right? And how to read the margins and everything that goes along with it.
I have no idea myself.
But you got to have it with you in order to even use it. And I don't even carry one anymore, so it still doesn't do me any good. You still got to have your phone charged up so that you can track your maps and do all your stuff. So
absolutely.
But there was a bit of a learning curve. And but I still am able to use the terrain features and looking at the maps that are on your cell phone now. Like Go Hunt Maps has amazing terrain features, and I can still look at that, and I can see a hilltop, and I can see a ridge line, and recognize them very, very quickly, and I can use those to create routes and navigate using that type of stuff, right? And I just know it because I looked at so many paper maps early on in my career that I just recognize it now. So
absolutely. So what was your first, or like what year did you go out for your first Western hunt then?
I think it was 2018. This is 2022. It was either 17 or 18. Yeah, it was either 2017 or 2018.
Okay, and where was that at, and what were you going for exactly?
It was over-the-counter archery elk in Colorado.
Okay.
That was my first introduction to, and I think that's a great way to introduce
Hmm.
somebody to Western hunting. Elk are very, very, very difficult to hunt, but you can get those over the counter opportunities, right? You can go out
Yep.
there. You can't go to Colorado and buy a deer tag over the counter. You have to apply for it and you have to go through that application process. Whereas you can still find over the counter elk tags in Colorado. So it makes it a
Okay.
little bit easier and a little less
Right.
stress that first couple of years. So
And did you go on your own?
great introduction. I no, I didn't. I ended up going with a couple of buddies, and then I had a good friend of mine that lived in Colorado at the time.
Hmm.
So one of my friends from Indiana drove out, and then at the time I lived in Texas, and I drove out from Texas, and then we met my friend that lived in Colorado. So there was three of us that got to
Okay.
hunt, and I think it was about 7 days. We did 7 days.
7 days.
Yeah.
Were you
Yeah.
guys successful on it?
No, not
I guess
in killing
success
an
could be.
animal.
I was gonna say you can
Yeah,
define it
it
as
kind
anything
of,
really.
yeah,
But
I will tell you, I walked away from that hunt with a lot of knowledge. And
mhm.
when I left, I literally remember like driving down the road and the cliche statement, right, of looking in the rear view mirror, which I
Yep.
don't know if I really looked in the rear view mirror, but I thought a lot about that hunt when I was on my way home. And at no point was I ever really mad that I didn't kill anything on
Hmm.
that trip, because we really did learn so much just by being in the mountain, all the way from under appreciating the size of the mountains, right? Like
Yeah.
a lot of times people will, and I was guilty of this too that first year, people will look at their maps and they'll plan this hunt and they've never been west, right? They've never
Yep.
seen the Rocky Mountains, and the Rocky Mountains are absolutely enormous. They are
Hmm.
massive. And if you've been in the Rocky Mountains, like I had been out in Colorado many times, or not many, but a few times, and
Hmm.
I've been hiking and taking these nice manicured trailheads and
Yep.
walking on these nice, national park trails. And those are great. And I thought, oh, well, I've been there. I've hiked in these trails before. No big deal. Well, that's a huge difference between trying to go a couple of miles and it's nothing but deadfall and you're leg over leg, or and
Hmm.
you're like high stepping for 2 miles straight with 40 pounds on your back, and it's wet
Yeah.
outside and your pants are wet and your clothes are soaked and you're literally just bushwhacking to try to find
Right.
something, right? So there was a huge learning curve there. And but anyway, long point there. I took so much away from that first year.
Hmm.
And I say that Jason and I both say this a lot. Jason Holiday from Harvest Holiday podcast.
Yep.
Jason and I say this a lot. It's just, you just got to go, right? And don't worry so much about that first year and coming home with some 320-inch 6x6 bull.
Right.
Really, the idea should be go out there and experience it for the first time. And like if
Hmm.
you've never slept in the mountains before, that is a
Yeah.
whole learning curve, man. That
Yep.
it's that
Yep.
it's very, very quiet, and it's just different,
Yeah.
you know.
Jason and I just
So
recorded a podcast that'll be coming out in a couple weeks, and we were talking about that same thing. And I know he said it on his podcast before. Like, if you think you can go from never going at all, and then just think you're going to do a 7 or 10 day solo hunt out in the mountains, and you haven't even slept in a tent in your backyard since you were 10, like, boy, oh
yeah,
boy, do you have a wake up call coming for you. Like, you gotta,
yeah,
it
yeah,
is so
totally.
different.
And that's one thing that I always say, like if you haven't camped out since you were in Cub Scouts, then
Right.
I tell people just go to the local campground and just set up a tent and sleep
Yeah.
in the tent, but turn your cell phone off for 24 hours while you're sleeping in that tent and see what happens. Because the likelihood that when you go out west somewhere, and if you're going to do a backpack style hunt, you probably aren't going to have cell phone service. So when's
Yep.
the last time that you even went 24 hours without getting an update or a text message or an Instagram,
Yeah.
whatever notification. And it's different, man. It really is. You don't realize how often you're
You're
in your
just going
phone
straight to
until,
your hand,
yeah,
looking at,
just
yeah.
look at it. Wow, dang, no updates. Dang, no text message. Dang, no text message. And so, yeah, I always tell people, go spend a couple days in a campground and turn your phone off and maybe go do
Mhm.
some hiking at a state park or something, and test out your air mattress and your sleeping bag, and some
Yep.
of those things that you might not really enjoy when you have to have them, you
Yep.
know. If that makes any sense, when you're 5 miles away from the truck and you're completely exhausted and
Yep.
you've never tried to blow up an air mattress at 10,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
The air's pretty thin at 10,000 feet. So you start looking for ways to make that easier.
Yeah, that's
But
one
yeah,
thing.
I test your gear and get out there and just practice, right?
Absolutely. And even for me, like a couple weeks ago, went to the Total Archery Challenge in Crystal Mountain, and I just got a campsite. Not, I originally wasn't just to like go test gear. It was just because I couldn't freaking afford the resort. They're like
Sure.
$800 for 2 nights, and I'm like, I'll get back to you. Like I went, and then it was like, okay, well, I could probably get a tent and then just camp, and then like $10 a night. I was like, that sounds a lot better. So I did
Yeah,
that.
that's what I'm gonna do.
And
Hmm.
even the sleeping pad, like that's one thing, like blowing it up. The thing that came with it, it's one of those ultralights, but it's got like a little air blow up bag thing that attaches to it. And I was like, that's something I never would have thought about. And what, like figuring out how to use that. And it took like 5 minutes to fill it up, but I didn't have to do anything other than just like one little quick blow, just right in, and the bag
Yep.
filled up.
Yep.
And even just learning like sleeping bag, I just have my mom and dad have some old, I think it's like my dad's grandparents or something, just really old sleeping bag, and it's all cotton,
Hmm.
and it got dewy at night. And I'm like, ooh, all right, learn that now. I'm glad I did that before I went
Yeah.
out there, like 100% test the gear.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
granted, I was still comfortable enough, and if I needed something, I could, but I was glad I did it then than before getting out in the mountains going crap.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I like to tell people too, if it's your first year and you're going out and there's not a ton of money laying around, which not everybody has tons of money just laying around to burn, um, just set up a base camp or sleep at the truck.
Yep.
And then you can take, your dad's old cotton sleeping bag and an old cot. And if it's September, you really don't even need that much shelter. You could almost sleep in the back of the truck. I've done that many times where I just put out my air mattress and
Mhm.
unless bugs are bad, and then I'll throw up a tent just to keep the bugs off of me. I've slept in just a screened in tent, without
Yep.
the rain fly attached to it. If it's real hot, keeps the bugs off of you and lets wind kind of blow through the tent. So, but you can save a lot of money is what
Mhm.
I'm getting at, by not buying the latest and greatest, most ultra light, whatever thing is. If you're only going to sleep in the woods maybe once or twice on a
Mhm.
6, 7, 8 day hunt, if you're going to be at the trucks most of the time, I do that almost all the time. Anytime I go, I stay at the trucks. I
Yeah.
have a huge canvas tent. I got a heater that hooks up to a propane tank, and that thing stays warm. I stay
Yeah.
warm. I sleep great at night, and I eat good food. And we enjoy our hunts when we go.
I
So
was gonna say, I know I was listening to you and Jason talk on the one, and Jason's like talking about doing the like freeze dried meals and all that, and doing all this, and then you're talking about bringing pie to camp and all this, and just totally different. He's like, I am doing it wrong, man. I'm like, I
yeah,
like
yeah.
that camp a lot better. That sounds awesome, man. Like,
It really, really is,
yeah.
man. And then and it also makes it a lot easier to where, like, for example, that first year that we went, we got into elk. We got into elk every day. We just A lot of times it's really hard to get within 30 or 40 yards or 50,
Mhm.
shooting distance in the mountains. But we were in elk and we ended up blowing them out of there, and we pushed the elk up over a saddle, up over on the other side of the mountains. Well, we
Mhm.
were 2 miles from the truck. So all we did was we went back to the trucks. We grabbed some bug out tent. We left a big camp where we were originally at, and
Yep.
we all had some little bug out tents. We grabbed up our smaller tents and grabbed our sleeping bags, and we drove our trucks all the way around to the backside of that mountain. And we set up camp on that backside, and we were, without having to climb up to like 12,000 feet and go over and get all into it. We were just basically set up a spike camp on the side of the road on the backside of the mountain, and we hunted elk from that side of the mountain.
Okay.
So, but it gives you that base camp gives you that flexibility to be able to go back, grab the trucks, head out. There was days where we drove 30 miles, on the other side of 2 mountain ranges over, and we would hunt those areas. Because I told you I had that friend of mine that was from Colorado, and he would say, well, I was driving down the highway the other day and saw a herd over this way. Why don't we go over there and poke around a little bit? So we drive 30 miles and we'd load up and go. Just you're kind of flexible if you're that way.
Absolutely. So what are some of the different Western hunts you have done? You've hunted elk, I know. What are some other things that you've done too?
Yep. So elk, mule deer, antelope, and then coos deer out in Arizona, bear. I think that's about it. Every year I say every year I usually, that doesn't make any sense, does it? Every year since I've started, I've gone out to southern Arizona, and I've hunted deer in January, archery deer in January.
Okay.
In Arizona. And every year I've been out there, I've shot a deer. Except the first year that I went, I was out there for a military school, actually, and I had scheduled this school perfectly in line with the coos deer season. And the day that I graduated the course was opening morning for deer season. So I basically was out there, for this training, graduate school, and then I was going to spend a week out there chasing deer. And that day, opening morning, I got a phone call, and there was a family emergency back home, and I packed up and I had to drive home. So I didn't get to go on that deer hunt. I did a lot of scouting and saw some cool deer. The next year I went out, you probably can't see it up there, but I shot this little spike, tiny little coos deer. It looks like a little devil head up there. Shot that spike. People always give me a lot of crap for that little head that I had done, but archery coos deer is one of the hardest things that you could ever try to hunt. Coos deer are really tough to kill, and that was my first archery coos deer, so I had the head.
There you go.
I had a Euro mounted, and then the second year I went out there, I shot a little mule deer buck, and then this past year I shot this buck right here. So
nice.
That's a good. He's a really nice buck.
Yeah, that's good.
I always try to hunt mule deer. And this year I didn't draw any elk tags, and all I drew was mule deer tags. So I'll be hunting deer all year. I'm going on some. This antelope hunt was super.
Yes.
Those things are awesome, man. They're super fun to hunt. I totally recommend it. A lot of guys will say, well, what's the best animal to hunt if you're new, like for a first hunt? And if you can get an antelope tag, I totally think that's worth it. They're fun to hunt, man. Yeah. Rifle, they're really, really tough with a bow, but they're fun to hunt with a rifle, because there's usually, if you're into them, they're everywhere. And you can spend a lot of time behind glass, and you can really look them over, and you can watch them. They're just really fun to kind of be amongst them, and around them. But yeah, so I'm going on a couple of elk hunts this year. I went on one last year. I shot my first elk last year. It was a cow elk. And so that was my first elk that I shot. I have, every year I've ever hunted them, I've been into them. I just never had an opportunity. And then my friend Dan shot a cow last year, and this year I've got a few different opportunities here in New Mexico, and I'm trying to, so I have some friends that have a elk hunt, and it's in the same unit where my mule deer hunt is at, if that makes sense. So I'm hoping, I'm going to try to go on that hunt with them, so that I can, as we're hunting elk, we can also scout for mule deer, and then that'll give me kind of an idea where I need to be for mule deer.
Right. So getting into all this can kind of be confusing for a lot of guys. Like, I know myself, being this the first year, and really like going at it and figuring out like drawing tags and preference points. And how was figuring all that stuff out? Like, did you have somebody to help you through it, or were you just kind of blindsided by it, or did you know before?
Nope, I had no idea before.
Yeah.
I learned about the over-the-counter opportunity, right? And so
Hmm.
that was kind of my focus. Um, although very early on, I found a website that's called Go Hunt, and I'll shamelessly plug them because I've been a partner with Go Hunt ever since
Hmm.
I found them. I've always had a great relationship with those guys, and Go Hunt has so much great information about all of that: how to draw tags, when to draw tags, deadlines,
Hmm.
um, points, how many points do you need to draw certain hunts, and all of the different species, and they really break all of that stuff down really well on their website. So I found Go Hunt and I started sort of learning the process, but I read something on their website or I heard it somewhere, or maybe it was a guest I had on the podcast that talked about starting to accumulate points.
Hmm.
And some states are point driven states. And so early on, well, 5 years ago, I started buying points in the states that I thought I would want to hunt eventually over time. And
Yeah.
I've accumulated those over the years. So now I'm and so that's why I think Colorado and that over the counter opportunity is really, really essential. It's, well, not necessarily essential, but it's really nice to be able to get into that over the counter opportunities, but buy Arizona points and buy Wyoming points.
Hmm.
And then this year you may not draw, you're likely not going to draw in Arizona because it's tough to draw with 0 points, but you're starting to build points and you still get an over the counter opportunity to go hunt in
Yeah.
Colorado,
Okay.
right? So you're still hunting, but you're accumulating points. So I started doing that early, and now I'm to the point where in a lot of these states I have 3 points, 4 points, 5 points. There's a couple of things I have in Arizona that just due to their bonus point system that they have. I have 7 points for deer or for antelope and elk, and
Okay.
like 5 points for deer there. So I'm kind of to that point now where I'll be able to start drawing some pretty good hunts,
Hmm.
and then I don't need to worry about those over the counter or overpopulated hunt opportunities because I'll be able to draw for
Right.
some of the other states. And then there's a few states too, like New Mexico, you don't need points. They have a no point system. Everybody applies.
Okay.
Um, you don't, you don't really have the same residents all have the same percentage of chance to draw, right? Depending on what they
Right.
put in. Non-residents have a certain percentage of chance, but you don't need 15 points to get a trophy bull elk hunt. You could put in
Hmm.
as a non-resident and you could draw a Gila Mountain hunt your first year ever applying, and you could be sitting in front of a 360-inch bull elk your first year ever
Right.
applying in New Mexico, right? You don't need all those crazy points to get to that level. You can apply
Okay.
every year. Yep. Idaho is like that too. I think there might be a couple more, but I don't
Gonna
pay
say
attention
because
to
I
all of them.
know I forget which pod it was, some podcast, same thing, just kind of heard it and I was like, what's this? Wait, what's this point system? And went to go hunt and kind of looked into that stuff. And even in Michigan, because I had no idea, I was just like, all right, well, that's because I was originally going to start putting in for points this year for different states. And then I was like, oh, so kind of the price. I was like, okay, maybe not quite yet. I'll stick to the over the counter for now. And then I was like, well, let me just look. And Michigan actually has, you can elk hunt if you're a Michigan resident,
Mm-hmm.
but same thing. So I was like, I had no idea we even had elk in our state, but I'm like, I forget we have the UP up there. So I'm like, yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that
Yeah.
they even have them down in Kentucky and Tennessee. There's elk down in there too.
Yeah.
Really tough to draw those hunts. I think Kentucky may have just started a hunt, or they've been doing it. There's very few tags. Missouri just had, like 2 years ago, Missouri had their first ever elk draw. Their first ever elk hunts
Okay.
were started. Might have been last year was the first year. So a lot of the eastern states are even starting. The herds are building,
Yeah.
and they're being managed properly. And I think eventually you guys will have better opportunity to hunt out there too. Doubt that they'll be the same quality, or the same. The herds will never, you'll never find a herd in Kentucky that's the size of the herd in Colorado, right? Colorado just has a massive herds of elk. But yeah, Go Hunt is a really good resource for that. There's some other ones out there. I'm just very familiar with Go Hunt. I've always used it. I just did a podcast on my show. I don't remember what it was, but it was all, I don't remember the show number or even what it was titled, but it was all about my application strategy. And I took that from the perspective of a guy that's only been doing it for a few years. And I talk a lot about starting to acquire points, and points can be a little costly. Like for Arizona, if you want to start accumulating points, you have to have you can't buy points without having a license. So you have to buy a hunting license, which is like $150 or something. But then you can buy the points after you make your initial $150 investment for the year, and then the points are like $15. So it's really not that much to start accumulating the points. But then you have a tag you have a license in your pocket. And like this year, I bought my points. I have my license. I have everything I need. And then, let's say next year. So next year I'll have my license because I'm bear hunting in Arizona. Jason's coming out, and him and I are going to bear hunt with a couple of other buddies I have here. And so I'm already going to have that license because I'm going on an Arizona hunt anyway. So why not just pay $15 or 45, right? I'll buy elk, deer, antelope. And so it gives me a reason to buy those points, and then I have that license. So then if I wanted to also go hunt deer again in Arizona, I'll have that license, and I can go out and do that. Arizona has some over-the-counter deer opportunities where you can get over-the-counter hunts. There you buy a license, and then I think the deer tag is like $300. So you could hunt deer for like $450 out in Arizona if you wanted to.
You're saying I got a buddy out there too. I could probably stay with him. That's not a bad idea. Yeah, there we go.
No, and it's so much fun. And this year they made some changes. Well, not this year. I think it goes into effect next hunting season. So it'll be 2023. But I think a lot of the units in that southern Arizona, they're going to do a quota. So they might only allow like 5 mule deer to be killed. And once that 5th one is tagged and registered, then that shuts down that unit, right? So unit 30, whatever, pick a number, 31, unit 31 would be shut down. So then maybe you got to go to 32 or 33, or you got to find one of the other units that isn't quota, that hasn't met the quota. Normally I go to Arizona. This year I'm actually not or 2023, next January, I'm not going out there. One, because of that quota thing, I'm not going to have a ton of time to get out there. And I'm kind of afraid if I put a whole big hunt together, that quota will be met by the time I can get there. And two, one of my really good hunting buddies drew a really good New Mexico mule deer tag in January. And we're going to dedicate pretty much any vacation time I have will be dedicated to helping him on his hunt. So I'm more worried about, I'd rather help him out on that hunt than,
I find that kind of interesting too, like in hunting, just it can have its stigmas, and people like got their spots and don't want to like keep, like in my head, I've always thought hunting is you're by yourself out in the woods, nobody else. And talking with people like you and Jason and going out there and seeing other people, like just going to be with your buddy to see him and help him be successful on his hunt, I think's kind of, it's a cool thing for somebody who's new to it to see that, like, oh, there can be a community aspect to this thing. And is there,
without a doubt,
you know, like, it's just, I don't know how to put into words, but it's just very more open than I thought it would be, if that makes sense.
So I'll give you a great example of that. I had a really cool spring bear hunt here in New Mexico. I invited some guys that I know through social media. I had met a couple of them. Basically, I asked these guys, hey, you guys want to come on this hunt? Man, it might be kind of fun. And they all said, yeah, man, that would be really cool. And then I hired one of them to be, he's a really great photographer, And I hired him to come out and take pictures and video and stuff like that. And he had hunted up in that area before. But long story short, I had never hunted with any of these guys before. There's three of them, and the four of us met on the mountain, and we all hunted together for about 2.5 days. And we had an absolutely amazing weekend. And we became, no doubt in my mind, we became just lifelong friends on the mountain that weekend. And it was all just because I randomly was like, hey, if you got, one guy came down from Denver, one guy came out from Silver City, New Mexico, which was like an 8-hour drive for him. He drove up, and so it was just really, really cool, the community that there is in Western hunting. Now, there's also some secrecy to it too. Like, even though I'm probably lifelong friends with those guys, if I called one of them up and said, hey, I drew this tag, I know you hunt this unit every year, they're not going to give me their best honey hole. They'll
absolutely
say,
good luck.
I could give you a couple of spots, right? But you're not going to get those great spots,
right?
Usually I'll usually help people out. Like, if I know Jason is working on trying to get a Colorado tag, and if he gets one, I've got a pretty darn good spot that I'm going to send him the points to if he goes out there this year. And then I had another friend that called me and said that he drew a tag in another area, and I have some pretty good spots in that area too. And I sent them to him. Like, I don't really keep any of that secrecy. I'll share with people, because I'm probably not going to get up to Colorado and hunt that area again for another few years. So what do I care if somebody goes in there and shoots a nice bull? There'll be another nice bull in years. There's not one bull, there's a whole bunch. So but yeah, it is a really, really cool community, and I think people are a lot more willing to help when you show act like genuine interest. And if I just randomly called somebody up and said, hey, give me a good spot, they're not gonna help me out. They'll say, yeah, I'll give you one, and they send you one that's like in the middle of town. Yeah, here's a good spot for you. It's next to the Denny's. So
right.
Yeah, but you just build friends and build relationships, and so guys like yourself that are out east or Midwest or wherever you're coming out from, I like to tell people not to be shy on the social media. I mean, that's how we communicate today, right? Like you said, you reached out to John Barklow on Instagram and he responded, and you had him on the podcast a couple of times, right? So I think that is super important for guys that are new to the game. Reach out to people, look at social media, and look at some of these guys hunting Western stuff. Just follow like hashtag elk hunting on Instagram, and you're going to see cool stuff, and you're going to see people, and you can start asking questions, and eventually you'll build relationships. And then, maybe, who knows, a couple of years down the road, might be out hunting with some cool dudes like Jason, man. Him and I started talking about bear hunting, and I said, well, why don't you just come out, man, and let's go bear hunting, right? Like, we could talk about it all day long, and or you could just come out. And so now he's going to come out next year, and we got a cool hunt. We're starting to plan the hunt, and there will be pie at that hunt. Just
I know. I heard you guys discussing which kind of pie, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's
yeah,
that's definitely
that's
the
how
move.
it's happening. So we were on that bear hunt, man. That friend of mine brought this, his wife bakes, and he brought this mixed berry pie that was absolutely freaking incredible. It was so good. But aside from the pie, the first night that we got there, it was me and my buddy Andres, and Andres like sets up a black stone stove, and he pulls out a pork shoulder that he had just smoked the past weekend, and he chops it up. We put pork shoulder out, man. We had fresh tortillas, and we started making pork tacos right there that night on the Blackstone at camp. Those were freaking amazing. We got up the next day. We went out, we hunted all day, and we came back, and my friend Jordan, the one that brought the pie, he had cooked a brisket the weekend before. Dude. So he brought smoked brisket, and we
really
have
roughing it
brisket
out there.
tacos. Yeah. So then we were eating brisket tacos. And then the next night we had a skirt steak that had been marinating for like 2 or 3 days. And we chopped that up and we make fajitas at camp. And like, I personally, I think there's a couple of different ways that you could go and hunt, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can do Jason's way where you eat shitty freeze-dried meals and your life sucks for a week. Or
Yep.
you put up a canvas tent and you put your heater in it and then you go cook brisket and fajitas, and you sit around the fire and have a couple of beers and we really enjoy it when we go out there. And
Yeah.
anytime we do that, I always have a little kit kind of off to the side that's my lightweight tent and a small sleeping bag, and like I have a to-go kit ready where if I want to spike out somewhere, I can go knock it out for a couple of days. But you will usually find me around a campfire somewhere next to a big comfy tent, and I'm in comfort. I'm all about
For sure.
that. Yeah.
So I know too, you mentioned a couple times throughout the last hour we've been talking about conservation. Is that something like you've been aware or that you're actively in? Because I know some people that just do the hunting, but then I've been listening a lot to like Ben O'Brien's podcast. He used to do the hunting collective. Now he's got Woodside that he does, and getting into that side. Is that something that you're involved in at all or know a bit about? Because I know for
No.
me, no.
Well, I know a little bit about it, and I absolutely do care about conservation, but I'm not a member of any organization or group or anything that Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. I'm a member, but I don't really participate in any events or anything like that. But I do pay my membership because I think it goes to a good cause. So, but yeah, I think everybody has the opportunity to play their part in conservation. When you're out when you're hunting, you're playing your part in conservation one way or another.
Right.
Take care of the environment. Just I try to do it that way, right? Like I'm always good. I try to not start big fires if I know there's going to be a fire warning, right? Like the entire state of New Mexico is on fire right now, and well, I can't say a lot about that because the fire, one of the biggest fires, it's the biggest fire in the history of New Mexico, was started by a controlled burn by the Forestry Service. So there wasn't even like some guy out flipping cigarette butts out of the side of the car, or something like that. But yeah, I definitely think conservation is important, and there's organizations that are out there doing it, and I think they do a great job of that. So promoting hunting and talking about it and being on podcasts and talking about doing it the right way and all of that stuff is just as much and just as important as it is as the companies like Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation that are paying tens of thousands of dollars to purchase land access and easements so that we can get access to more hunting space, right? That's all hugely important, but being able to talk about it is, to me, it's just as important as the guys that are out there doing that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Because if it wasn't for podcasts for me, like I was telling you beforehand, before we started recording during 2020, and for me, like I was only off work for 2 weeks and then I was back to work and I was still working. When I'm at work, it's so loud in the shop that I have my headphones in, and I always tell people I basically work 2 jobs. I'm doing my job, but then I'm getting 40 plus hours a week of listening to different podcasts and learning, and just understanding too, like hunters, because you kind of, I'm sure, like when you watch movies and stuff, you'll get the stigma of they're just the big guys wearing the flannels that just want to go kill stuff just for the sake of killing stuff, and learning the conservation side of things and how actually if you overpopulate with certain animals that it can be bad for our environment and doing all this stuff. I'm like, and then learning too, like people don't even realize that they pay tax with what is it, Pittman and Robinson tax, and doing that when you buy ammo, that and just hearing like all these people with like the nature, like hunters in general, donate the most through their tags for conservation, and I had no idea.
And there's some states, I'm going to try to look this up real quick, that are starting to enact things like I'm pretty sure Colorado just put a tax where you have to buy a pass every year if you want to utilize the mountains and you want to be out hiking. So
Okay.
I think that's great, because
Yeah.
before that, if you wanted to go out and just go hiking, there was no license required for it. There was no money exchange for it. There was no anything. And a lot of that conservation effort was being, all of it was being funded
Yeah.
by hunters. Well, now if you want to recreate on the public land,
Mhm.
and let's say, 1,000 people want to go buy those $30 passes, well, that's $30,000 that goes
Yeah.
into that public land. And even if it's fixing a bathroom or the porta johns or
Yep.
whatever it is, whatever structures out there, or the campgrounds, cleaning them up, all of that stuff goes back, and then it all just kind of feeds back
Mhm.
into taking care of all that good public land. And then another thing too that I think a lot of people don't realize is that the more space that the animals have to roam and feed and
Yep.
to just be in, that much more space allows for a herd to grow bigger, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, think about it. If you're a family and you're a family of 10 people that's living in a 2-bedroom home, eventually you run out of space for your family to live, right?
Yep.
Well, you win the lottery and then you go buy a 10-bedroom home, and now how much more space do you have for grandma to move in and aunts and uncles to move in?
Yep.
So you start to really open up more space, and then that goes reproduction and all of that stuff too. So a cow might have, there may be more fawns than there is,
Mhm.
because of there's more space, there's more food, and there's more area for them to grow. So a lot of those conservation organizations that are allowing that, and they're buying that land, and they're opening it up for the animals to be able to graze on and all of that, man, it just
Mhm.
does so much for those herds and really makes them grow, and really
Absolutely.
really helps populations. So yeah, it's absolutely a big thing. And there's great organizations out there to get behind and to
Mhm.
support and to be a part of. And like I said, I
Yep.
usually just donate, or don't donate, but I buy a membership to Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation every year, so that the money goes back into that.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of those things, like, I just asked because is getting into the hunting, and people ask like, "Oh, why would you do that?" Or and they have this stigma behind it, and just actually having the knowledge and learning and talking with people, and like I said, I could not have told you that hunters are the ones that were preserving most of the public lands that we do have and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, just because of the tags and going out there. I was like, oh, this goes totally against what I've seen in the news and media my whole life of these guys are, bad or trying to take it out. And yeah, so I was just curious. But going back to the podcast, so I know you talked about it a little bit in the beginning. You started it and the reasoning behind. I know we talked off air too, kind of wanting to stop. I think that'd be kind of a good thing too for people to hear. What made you kind of come back and want to stick with the podcast, even though you had previously left it for a little while, for a couple months, you said?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, over time, things start to become, even though it's a hobby, it's work, right? This
Oh
podcasting
yeah.
isn't, it's not just you and I sitting here BSing for an hour or hour and a half or however long. There's a lot of work that goes into it. There's editing and scheduling, and
Yep.
there's just a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And I had been doing it for 4-ish years, and I was just kind of getting wore out on doing all of it. And I was about to hang up the headphones or whatever, hang up the hat. And there was, I think I had told you before we started that there
Mm-hmm.
was one day where I was done, and I said I was done, and I realized that day, outside of work, I had some personal conversations, and all
Mm-hmm.
of those personal conversations, that they were all with people. I think it was just people I had never even met face to face, and they
Mm-hmm.
were people that I met through the podcast and have become friends with over time. And I realized that just the social networking ability of the podcast and meeting new people and being able to talk and
Yeah.
have conversations, and it was just, to me, it was kind of a wake up call, like, man, I really don't want to be done with this yet, because I
Yeah.
really really do enjoy meeting new people, and just the relationships that I've created, just like the
Yeah.
guys that went to that bear hunt with me. I would never, ever, ever would have been bear hunting with those guys if there wasn't for the podcast and for Instagram and social media and those social networking sites. So I decided to keep it going. I got another couple of years in me, I think. And there was a really, after I had retired from the Army, I started a new job, and, I kind of knew my Army life and I knew how to manage all of that. And after I retired, a couple of things happened to me after I retired, but in between the retirement and then starting the new job, there was some stuff, and I'll touch on that here in just a minute too. But I started a new job, and although I was doing relatively the same thing, it was still new, and I didn't know what I was doing, right? So there was a lot of extra hours that I was putting into learning my new job and understanding it and meeting all these new people and just figuring it out, right? And so there wasn't a whole lot of time for the podcasting on the side. And there was a period of time there where that it was just something had to go, right? And there was one thing that's paying the bills, and that's the one I'm going to keep. And I absolutely love my job anyway. I'm one of the lucky people in the world, man, that I wake up and I'm ready to go to the office. I love what I do. And so I wasn't going to give that up for podcasting, right? This isn't a life or a career for me. It's a hobby.
Right.
So anyway, so I kind of pushed it to the side at one point in time so I could learn my new job. And then I got comfortable and I know how to, I know the new position and I know all that stuff. And so there was kind of a ebb and flow there where and now I get it. So it's a lot easier for me to come home at night and sit here and record and do this stuff. And then the other funny thing that happened, and I don't know if I've ever really talked about this, but so I had retired and I was podcasting pretty hard around that same time. And I had looked at doing it all the time, right? I thought, well, this is something I could make money at it. I knew I could make money at it because I'd had many companies that have reached out and wanted to pay and all this other stuff, which I never really did. I kept my sponsorships very, very low and very tight group, and I never really took money for anything. So anyway, I thought, well, I could probably do this full time. And I caught myself like going to the archery range. And when I would go like a 3D course here in New Mexico, and I went and I took different outfits, right? Like camo clothes and non-camo clothes. And I took all this stuff and I caught myself at the range, like changing clothes to go out and take more pictures and get more content while I was at the range. And I was like, what in the freak am I doing, man? Like this is this is not what I want to be doing, man, is coming out to a range like this. I want to go to the range. I want to shoot my bow. I want to have a really good day. I want to focus on form and shooting and, muscle movements and focus on the shot. I don't want to be thinking about, man, I got to go back to the car and I got to put on this other shirt so I can take another picture. Right. That's what, yeah. And so that was another like breaking point for me. That was like, no way, keep this as a hobby. Don't ever take it to another level. And I'm really, really glad that I had that gap in between retirement and new job, because it was, that is not the person. That's not me, man. I'm not that type of person that's Instagram, whatever, so yeah. I mean, it's cool to have good pictures and I enjoy Instagram and I like posting stuff, but like I said, man, why am I taking a change of clothes to the archery range? And then clearly I wasn't there to shoot my bow. I was there for other reasons.
Right. It's like the guy that goes to the gym, takes a picture of himself bench pressing one time and then leaves.
And then he goes home. Right. Yeah. And he's still 30 pounds overweight, but he's been going to the gym for 6 months. Yeah. And so that's where I was at. But yeah, the social networking aspect of the podcast, and I think you said it earlier too, where you're surprised how the community comes together and everybody is so cool in it. And I totally agree, man. I don't think I've ever met anybody or been on a podcast with somebody that I don't at least, follow along with their social media and like their stuff and pay attention to what they're doing. And many people I have cell phone numbers with, and I text back and forth. And a lot of people I'm always texting or calling, and we just talk, right? We're just friends.
Right.
So,
Yeah. No, I brought that up too, just because that's like reaching out to the people that are listening to mine right now. Like, that's the whole point of this. Like, for me, that it, like you said, just reaching out to people and talking and learning and building that community and learning together. And just like you said too, having that conversation. People, like I said, I've been blown away with how cool people have been. Like, and even afterwards, like, oh, that reminds me, you should talk with so and so or have so and so on your podcast, and just little different things. And had you told Matt back in 2019, 2020 that he would have, like, I mean, I was painfully shy, did not like talking. Like, I think I shared on one of the podcasts a while back. Like, my uncle told me that he had no idea that I was shy as a kid growing up. He's like, yeah, run in real quick, go buy the movie tickets, I'll park and come meet you in there. And I looked at him, I was like 12 or 11, so he's babysitting me for the weekend so parents could go out. And I just look at him, I go, oh, I can't legally, like, you got to be 13 to buy a PG-13 ticket. And he's like, wait, really? And then he's like, could see that I was nervous. He's like, are you just nervous to go talk? I'm like, yeah, man. Like, and they're like, I don't want to talk. He's like, you almost got me with that. Like, you're this close. But going from that kind of a kid to, is just like a switch flip to like, no, like, what is there to be scared about? And go out and meet people, try new things. That's what life's about, man, especially when you're younger too, like this. And anyone that is out there listening that is younger, if you never thought of picking up a bow or going, I mean, it doesn't have to be hunting, even mountain biking, whatever you want it to be. Like, that podcasting for me has just been the avenue that I listen to. I was like, oh man, I really can learn a lot. And maybe somebody else will get something from it. And I know I've learned something from your podcast, so I'm glad you stuck with it and came back, because I've been, even your re-uploads that you were doing, and I know you kind of lost some, but hopefully they get those fixed.
We're working on that. Yeah, we're working on it. If not, man, I'll keep recording and give them back.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
You said something important there too. If you're interested in it, if there is any community that will share like help, it's the hunting community. So if you don't even understand what a compound bow is or recurve bow, and you're really curious, just walk into a bow shop and literally tell someone, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have a lot of questions. And I promise you, you will walk out of that store with 3 or 4 new friends and a whole lot more information. And I say that with 100% certainty, because when I started Backcountry Rookies, I had originally started it. There was another guy that was part of it, and he's kind of a co-host or whatever. And he was very, very skeptical about the name Backcountry Rookies. He never liked that name. And I asked him why not, and he said, well, because first off, I don't want people to know that I don't really know what I'm doing, and second, what happens in 4 or 5 years when we're not rookies anymore and we are proficient, right? And we learn it and we're starting to understand things. And I said, because the show isn't about me and you, the show is about you, right? Like, you are a backcountry rookie, man. You're looking at going for your next year. And next year, there's going to be 2 more of you. And then the year after that, there's going to be more. And so there's always people that don't know, right? There's always going to be new guys coming into any game that there is, right? It doesn't have to be backcountry Western style hunting. It could be bowling, or it could be crocheting, or whatever it is that you're into. You got to start somewhere. And that was the whole idea behind the Backcountry Rookies, was just kind of follow along with my journey and learn something along the way, even if it's just to push you over the Mississippi River, right? To get you out west and to get you out there. And I tell people a lot of times it can be really expensive that first couple of years, because there's so much gear and tags are not cheap. And I tell people a lot of time, like, if it was you and a couple of your buddies and you guys were going to go out hunting for your first year, I can almost guarantee you with 100% certainty, if 3 dudes went to Colorado with over-the-counter tags, 3 dudes are not coming home with elk. I can almost guarantee you that. You're probably going to get one. So you're better off if one dude has a little bit more money than the other guys, let him buy the tag, go out there as a team, and you're going to learn so much just by being behind the shooter and calling and working on scenarios to try to bring elk in. And then if you shoot something, okay, so your buddy maybe gets the rack, but you get a hind quarter and a backstrap, and that's worth more than that rack.
I still haven't had it, and I was gonna say that's like,
oh, it's good.
It's real good. Cannot wait for the day that I'm able to, whether it's mine or not, or just try some elk, because everyone raves about it, and like it's
good, man. It's good.
I'm dreaming it up in my head what it's like, man. It's I'm excited for that.
I'll tell you this: my wife doesn't like wild game at all. And she eats elk. She will eat elk. That antelope, man, she does not like that antelope. Antelope's got a little different type of flavor to it. She doesn't like deer. She would eat wild hog. I used to shoot a lot of hogs when I was in Texas, and she would eat wild hog, but that was really about it. And then I brought elk home, and I made some burger. I think we made a meatloaf or something. Either way, anytime she tries it, man, she's like, yeah, okay, I get it, man. Elk is really good. So she likes elk, man. And so I'm going to continue to try to bring elk home every year. This year I didn't draw a tag, but I've still got a lot I shot my elk last year in December. Was that December? Either way, it was a late rifle cow tag. And so I still have quite a bit down there in the freezer that we can go through.
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of a good spot to wrap up, man. I appreciate it. I want to be respectful of your time, and thank you so much for coming on. And why don't you go ahead and shout out where people can find you, and I'll link it down in the description too.
Yeah. Backcountry Rookies pretty much everywhere. I think if you'd search it on Google box or Google machine, it'll come up. I got a website. I don't do a lot with the website. I'm in the process of making some changes and doing some stuff. Instagram is out there. That's the best way. If you want to reach out and ask questions, and Instagram is totally the best way to get in touch. Facebook, I have Facebook. I don't look at it, but it's out there. Rarely. I do that a lot. I used to have a really good friend of mine that helped me and ran all the social media stuff, because I don't really like being on it that much. And I set a timer to mine for 30 minutes a day, and that's once that goes off, that's it for the day.
That's smart.
But that dude took a new job and got super busy, and it wasn't able to continue doing it. So now it's on me, and I do it. But Instagram is by far the best way to get in touch.
Sweet. Well, thank you again for coming on, Chad. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Awesome show. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it.